In a world such as ours where the Grand Theft Auto series is known far and wide beyond video games, it shouldn't be surprising that we've seen so many titles of a similar, if not the same type. It's hard to imagine the industry today without GTA. Its formula of driving around and shooting things and or people has served many developers well for their very own open world action adventure games that contain driving mechanics. The crime spree bag of controversy that is GTA has inspired many since it first came to light. This has resulted in some of the most popular franchises to date coming to fruition. These GTA clones, as they are labelled, are some of the best games out there, and one of them was a game where the devs most likely used Grand Theft Auto as a blueprint and filled in the blanks with the world of one of film's most iconic characters, Tony Montana. The game in question is Scarface: The World Is Yours. Hello everyone, I am RedBeakRaven and welcome to a video on Scarface: The World Is Yours. In this video I will be looking back on the game that sated my appetite for virtual drug smuggling and cursing on command at every person that got in my way. I'll talk about the Scarface game in general, what it was all about, what made it good, where are we with the sequel and its potential, and how it's a game that needs to return one way or another. Also, credit to Will Z for the gameplay footage in this video. If you're watching, I thank you very much for that. Link to his channel is in the description if you fancy watching playthroughs without commentary. So let's get on with talking about Scarface, shall we? Scarface: The World Is Yours is an open world action adventure game developed by Radical Entertainment that came out in 2006 on the PS2, Xbox and PC. It also released on the Nintendo Wii a year later. Now the game isn't what it may appear to be. This isn't a video game adaptation of the film Scarface, but rather an unofficial sequel in the form of a game that alters what happened at the end of the 80s classic. In 2004 it was revealed by Vivendi Universal Games that Radical Entertainment were working on a third-person shooter adaptation of the 1983 film Scarface. Great film, really displays Al Pacino's skill as an actor, also teaches a fair few lessons about life, mainly quit while you're ahead. But anyways, so for those who don't know or maybe even remember, Radical Entertainment is barely a Canadian developer that first opened in 1991. Now they are mainly known as the developers of the Prototype series. Crash Bandicoot fans might remember them as the developers of the later Crash games between 2005 and 2008. Me personally, I remember them as the developers of The Simpsons Hit and Run, a game that answers that not so commonly asked question, what do you get when you cross GTA with The Simpsons? It was a very good game. I of course remember them also as the devs behind Scarface: The World Is Yours. Vivendi, you may already know the name from their tussle with Ubisoft and how they seek to buy it in a hostile way, however that really works. I'm not going to go into that. Suffice it to say, if you think Ubisoft's bad now, oh, it could be much worse. Vivendi is a fairly old name in the industry. In fact, they don't really have a place in the industry now, nor are they welcome from the sounds of it. They were once the parent company of Activision and Blizzard. Some of you may remember Vivendi Games, a division of Vivendi who merged with Activision around 2008. Makes sense really, seeing as though most of what was under Vivendi is now in their hands. Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, Sierra Entertainment, who used to be quite a big publisher until they were closed down in 2008, but they were revived in 2014 and now apparently focus on re-releasing their old games, collaborations and bringing back old franchises, which is relevant here because one of the games they published was Scarface: The World Is Yours. The game was originally going to be a third-person shooter but was later announced to be an open-world action-adventure title instead, a GTA-style game essentially. Between 2004 and 2006, the game underwent through many changes. Due to negative feedback it received from both critics and the public following its E3 demo in 2005, Radical overhauled the entire game. Something to note here was that the feedback given was immensely helpful to the developers, as they apparently underestimated the difficulty of making a large open world game. They had never done anything of this size before, and because of that feedback, created the game we can see today. Scarface: The World Is Yours was a fantastic title and one of the best games of its type I've ever played, and it's remarkable how much of an achievement it was that Radical had created such a good product of something they'd never really done before. The game was meant to be released in 2005 but was pushed back to 2006, most likely due to the feedback it received and the need for an overhaul. So the game finally launched in 2006 and was met with a lot of positive reviews across all systems. As you could expect, there were many arguments over the game being nothing but a GTA clone, but also many arguments against this, and I agree with a lot of them. Some said it advanced the genre, it fixed many of GTA's issues, while others stated it's similar, yet an entirely different game. I would agree, Scarface The World Is Yours is a fairly unique experience, even to this day. Now the whole arguments of games copying other games has been a lot less bothered with since then. After all, if games weren't ripped off, we'd have significantly less titles in our libraries. Now for those who may already know this game and the film Inside Out, you might want to skip ahead to whatever time is listed in the description below, unless you want a memory refreshment or hear my thoughts on the game. I'm going to go over the game's aspects, do a little review of it before I get to what happened following its release, and sequel talk and so on. Right, spoiler alert for the film by the way. No, seriously, it's a major spoiler. If you do not want to know what happens at the end, please skip the next. In fact, you're probably best watching the film first before this. Go do it now. Seriously, it's a great film. So the game starts essentially where the film ends. Al Pacino's character, Tony Montana, is a Cuban immigrant in America that eventually becomes a drug lord dealing specifically with cocaine, as you do. A lot of things happen and eventually he double crosses a powerful Bolivian drug lord called Sosa, who sends a ton of armed men after him. They assault Tony's mansion. Tony himself grabs an M16 rifle with grenade launcher attachment of course, thus beginning the famous film shootout where Tony just doesn't die and says the fabled words, "Say hello to my little friend." How about it, Steve? Hello. Now in the film, Tony is killed by an assassin known as the Skull. Skull creeps up on Tony as he's doing his thing on the balcony, shoots him in the back, causing Tony to fall into the small pool in the lobby below. The film ends and we're left to reflect on the very important lesson this teaches us. The game, however, misses the point of the film, and that's not a criticism by the way. I know there are people who hate how games do this, and I honestly don't care. They're games, so buzz off will ya? I'll enjoy my thing while you enjoy yours. In the game, Tony survives the whole ordeal, killing Skull before he himself is killed. After surviving the mansion assault, Tony goes into hiding. Having lost all of his money and the entirety of his empire, Tony begins on a path to reclaim it and take revenge on Sosa. However, this Tony is unlike the Tony we see in the film. After realizing he truly messed up, what with him burying himself in mountains of coke and shooting his best friend in a drug-fueled rage, Tony decides to turn himself around. Not the leave the life of crime behind around, but the aggressive paranoid addict that he was around. Tony swears never to do drugs again. He's less aggressive, has a more positive attitude on life, and actually treats other people better. After a couple of missions that taught you what you needed to know, you were free to do as you pleased to some extent. The overall goal was to conquer Miami and make a shed load of money in the process. Basically, create and expand your drug empire until you were ready to eliminate Sosa. There were 4 regions in Miami that you had to take over, but you couldn't actually do this in any order. You first had to take Little Havana before downtown unlocked, then once you took that, you could move on to the other 2 regions. Though this conquest of the famous Florida City wasn't Mafia 3 style. In between your efforts to take turf, you had to do some missions and level up before continuing with the Empire stuff. It's not the kind of freedom you'd expect in such a game nowadays, but it did allow for better storytelling. The game's narrative wasn't that strong, but it was enough to keep you interested. Plus, there were a fair few things to do outside of progressing through the story, which you didn't really feel like you were progressing through because it all revolved around Tony regaining his power and rebuilding his reputation. So it was more of a natural flow than a simple beginning, middle and end narrative. The original idea for the game was for it to be a straight adaptation of the film, but the devs quickly realised, and thank God they did, that doing so was too problematic. They deemed the original screenplay too good to be replicated in a game, and thought people wouldn't be too bothered about Tony himself, as a lot of people would know he dies at the end. So there really isn't much of a point in investing in a character doomed from the start. We all should know by now that video games and films don't go together too well. In fact, very rarely has there been a successful game adaptation of a film, especially vice versa. Those that actually deviate away from being a straight up adaptation, however, tend to be more successful, and a part of that comes from original storytelling. The developers tried to get Oliver Stone, the film's writer, to write the script for the game, but after he declined, they were able to get David McKenna, writer of American History X. As a big fan of the film, McKenna brought a lot to the table. Well-written dialogue, characters, the way the story just works with everything else you have to do to progress. The premise was simple. Tony is taking back what he once owned to get powerful enough to take revenge on Sosa. Simple revenge story, but it worked very well. Best thought of as a backdrop rather than the narrative because of how it all tied together. The thing is, mostly everything you did was for you, no one else. There are 1 or 2 missions where you had to do the right thing that barely benefited you, but for the most part everything was done for your your personal game, and that made sense seeing as though Tony was the boss and no one stood above him. The game's depiction of Montana was almost perfect, and a big part of that came from the dialogue McKenna wrote. Everything about Tony in the game, from the voiceover to animation, was excellent. What made that even more remarkable was that it wasn't even Al Pacino voicing Montana. Pacino apparently attempted to do the voice, but because of how much effort it took to do so, he found it difficult to do. Basically, he could no longer do the heavily accented Montana we know. However, Pacino did pick the actor who would voice him. Andre Sogliuzzo would provide the voice, while Pacino the lightness. And I apologise if I got Andre's name wrong, because I cannot for the life of me pronounce that any other way. Ever play Electronic Arts Godfather games? Ever wonder why Michael is the only character that doesn't look like his film counterpart? Well, that's because Al Pacino gave his likeness to the Scarface game instead. Also, what you might be interested in if you didn't already know, this game had quite the cast behind it. Robert Loggia and Stephen Bauer, who played characters in the Scarface film, came to voice various characters in the game. There was also James Woods, Cheech Marin, Michael Rappaport, and good old Basil from Austin Powers, Michael York. Oh, there was also Tommy Lee from Motley Crue. So Tony's quest to once again become the drug kingpin of Miami mostly revolved around the Empire aspect. There was quite a diverse amount of things to do in the game, but there was some level of repetition in it. You did end up doing basically the same thing when taking over the regions of Miami, but it wasn't actually bad repetition, some of it at least. The way you build your empire in this game is not as simple as taking over Territory Mafia 3 style, where you just essentially killed a bunch of people, did a mission, and then boom, you're in charge. In Scarface, you did a few missions here and there, and then your goal was to purchase various businesses that acted as fronts to sell cocaine, which you first had to gain from street dealers and big suppliers. What made this process even more interesting is that before you could buy each business, you had to do a mission. Upon completing the mission, the owner would allow you to buy the business and therefore expand your empire. The good thing about this was that most of the missions were not the same. Now, you did have to get down and dirty with the drugs you obtained. Early on, you'd be dealing with dealers on the street buying and selling coke, but eventually you could take over warehouses and unlock suppliers that supplied you with enormous amounts of the white stuff. That is when the big bucks would start rolling in, and unlike GTA 5 Online, suddenly all that crazy expensive stuff you could buy didn't seem too out of reach. What I especially liked was how easy it was to manage your empire and access the customization options. Tony's satellite phone allowed you to do all of this from a single menu. You could set up deals, call for a car, buy weapons, access the store where all the goodies were, and of course, you had a not really personal music player. The game's soundtrack was true to the films. All the hits from the film were in it, the organ music and the sinister 80s style tracks for combat and cutscenes were there also. So a great soundtrack that captured the essence of the film, therefore making this feel even more like a true Scarface experience. But on top of a great soundtrack and a very good empire building and managing aspect, the game also boasted some of the best customization in a game of its type out there. It was fantastic. You could change Tony's outfit, you could upgrade weapons you owned, buy various types of vehicles, purchase boats, a plane that allowed you to fast travel. You could customize Tony's mansion and buy extremely expensive unique objects such as an authentic spacesuit or the Liberty Bell, all which gave you reputation points, which I'll talk about soon. You could also invest in businesses for perks, though these investments were very expensive. One of the things that made Scarface stand out from the crowd was the fact that it clearly took things from GTA itself, only didn't just copy them but improve them. The game basically solved one of the biggest problems I've had with GTA and similar games since forever, and that is not enough things to spend your money on. Scarface presented you with a lot of things to buy and then a lot of things that cost an astonishing yet realistic amount of money. Suffice it to say, even late on in the game, after finishing the main story and doing 50 odd drug deals, you could easily find yourself poor, but at that stage you were earning millions. Let me just list what you needed money for: cocaine, weapons, vehicles, boats, mansion decorations, furniture, exotic items, investments, businesses, gambling, and reducing your heat levels, which were like wanted levels for both the police and gangs. The businesses I mentioned earlier were where most of your income came from. You could carry coke around and sell that directly to your businesses, but if you had coke stored at your warehouses, you could activate a mission that allowed you to collect money from your businesses that sold your product. It was also possible to buy henchmen that could aid you in your empire, which also allowed you to play as different characters. You had to buy a driver if you wanted cars to be brought to you anywhere in the game. You had to purchase a boat pilot to do the same for boats, an arms dealer so you could buy weapons over the phone, and an enforcer as well as an assassin to carry out side missions. You could also change characters. You could switch between Tony and the driver, enforcer, or assassin. The amount of content in this game still astonishes me today. Even the dialogue does, as you did have the ability to just talk to random people. Eat your heart out, GTA 5. Scarface did this years before you. In Scarface, you could hit a button that caused Tony to taunt his enemies in combat with his oh-so famous foul mouth. But when outside of combat, the same button could be pressed to talk to people and even taunt drivers and pedestrians when they were hit. Tony's dialogue ranged from highly amusing to just something serious that you'd expect him to say.
Okay, car inspection, get out. Oh, look at his fucking shoes. Oh, his fucking shoes come off. We're just saying hi, dog. Oh, I hit him too. Hey, wipe your ass. Me? I always tell the truth, even when I lie.
Taunt served a bigger purpose though. Tony Montana is known for having a lot of balls, and that information was used by the devs to create an element that both made sense and amused. In Scarface The World Is Yours, you had a balls meter. They were a unit in the game that you obtained from doing pretty much anything really, except killing police. That actually took away balls. Balls provided a few things, but the main one was filling the balls meter. Once filled, you could activate blind rage mode. This mode basically turned Tony's temper and bloodlust when angry into something that could be used by the player to gain an advantage in combat. Blind rage mode stuck you in a first person perspective, gave you invincibility, unlimited ammo, and gave you health for every kill. It was a very useful ability for getting out of tricky situations. Something I like the sound of now but was a tad bit excessive was how the game treated failure. Dying in games now has become something of a fairly big discussion in recent times, namely how most games fail to punish players when they mess up. Well, The World Is Yours did it in a way that made sure you didn't die at various times, as in it made sure you were very careful and did not die. The way money worked in the game was every scrap of change you earned was considered blood money, and this had to be laundered at a bank, which was also how you saved your game. God, I hated its save system. Anyway, so here on the right is your blood money and coke that you had on hand. If you died, no matter the circumstances, you lost all of this, both money and drugs. Whether you had $1,000 or $10 million, it didn't matter. You lost it all upon death. So it was crucial that you laundered money on a regular basis and didn't hold on to a lot of coke. Now believe it or not, this game had its fair share of RPG elements. One such aspect which I mentioned earlier was reputation. This was essentially your experience points in the game. Reputation was earned by doing all sorts of things, and it was reputation that unlocked a lot of content in the game. As you rose through the reputation levels indicated by the letters in the word Scarface in the pause menu, you'd gain access to more customization options, drug suppliers, and territory. You know, I'm glad they actually went down the route of adding RPG elements to the game, as it added so much to the gameplay itself. Well, it was really only leveling up Tony and weapon upgrades, so not a whole lot there, but it still added to the game. The gameplay was very, very good. Of course, you had your typical GTA formula in there. You could steal vehicles, explore the open world by foot, vehicle or boat, and you could kill gangsters, cops and drug dealers anytime you wanted. What you couldn't do, which was interesting but necessary to keep true to Tony Montana as a character, was kill pedestrians. Tony completely objected to killing women, children and innocent men. Therefore, the game didn't allow you to do that. Not that there was children in it anyways, but that's just the rules Tony lives by. You could take a weapon out and aim it at a random pedestrian, but Tony would refuse to fire. When you ran a person over in a car, they comically went flying but got back up and ran off like the troopers they were. Despite how great it may sound, it of course isn't a perfect game. In fact, I wouldn't say this title blew me away. It was just a very, very good game that I grew to love. I think a lot of people went in with low expectations, as even back then, films and video games in the same sentence didn't have the best reputation. The World Is Yours turned out to be better than initially thought. Its shortcomings were few, not by today's standards obviously, but there was room for improvement in all areas. Graphically, it wasn't anything special, it had an annoying save system, driving wasn't as good as it could have been, even back then it was less than ideal, and the map itself was probably the biggest issue I had with the game. The road layout was weird. I didn't really like how each of the 4 regions were split up. Also, did I forget to mention you could journey south to islands south of Florida? Yeah, but that map wasn't great neither. Critics said roughly the same thing. The main criticism for Scarface was its eventual repetition, map design and technical issues. Basically, the game didn't run that well on PCs, and the console version looked, well, not pretty in comparison. It could be debated that Scarface came out at almost the wrong time, as we were seeing next generation visuals around then. Of course, the Xbox 360 was released in 2005 and the PS3 a year or so later, but despite Scarface releasing near the end of the PS2 and Xbox's lifespan, the game was a commercial success. It had sold 1.5 million copies by 2007 and would go on to sell even more with its Wii release. Just take that in for a second. Scarface: The World Is Yours on a Nintendo console, a game that was banned in Germany for its violence and cruelty. Oh yes, this was and probably is the most violent, mature game on the Wii. I'm still surprised they were able to get it on the damn thing. The problem here, however, was that the Wii version was the most criticised, and you can probably guess why. No, it wasn't bugs or graphical issues, it wasn't removed features because they didn't do any of that. No, it was its controls. Critics stated it just wasn't fun to play with the Wii controllers, and like a golden 90s platformer, you fought with the game from start to finish. Only with 90s platformers you can be more forgiving. So Scarface was a success, and you may be wondering what happened. Why isn't there a sequel? Well, I really wish we didn't have to ask that question, but it all points to the time when Activision Blizzard became a thing. Vivendi had planned on turning Scarface into a multi-game franchise. There was even mention of not just the Scarface 2, but 3 and 4 as well. The World Is Yours was being made to come to the Xbox 360 following the previous gen console releases, but that was cancelled for reasons I'm not sure we know. It was likely because of what happened back in 2008. Back then, a deal had been struck between Vivendi and Activision. The former was to gain control of the latter. Activision Blizzard was formed and the rights to Scarface were transferred to them. However, towards the end of 2008, Activision Blizzard seemed to have struck down any hope of a sequel. When Vivendi Games merged with Activision, the latter had free pick of Sierra Entertainment's franchises. Unfortunately, yet not surprisingly, the list was incredibly short and Scarface 2 was nowhere to be seen. Unfortunately, the rights to it then went back to Universal, which are the owners of the Scarface license. And that was the end of that. And eventually, Activision Blizzard broke free of Vivendi's grip in 2013. So it's been almost 10 years since we've heard anything of Scarface as a game. It's baffling to think how such a good and successful title never got the sequel it deserved. The sequel I need. The World Is Yours is one of my favourite games of all time. The fact that it's up there with GTA even now is quite an achievement. The empire building, the customization, Tony as a protagonist, the dialogue, all things I absolutely loved about this, and what makes it even worse is how much potential this could have had as a series. I'm not talking about one that could rival GTA like many tried to make it sound as it was, but just another GTA inspired set of games that made their own mark on the industry. The gameplay in Scarface is something I've never seen done quite the same since. Yeah, there's titles that let you take over territory and customize a few things, but surprisingly not on the same level as this. For a game that's over 10 years old, Scarface still holds itself up in my book as one of the best open world games of all time, and a title that does something different with empire building, does it well enough, and had the potential to do even better. I can only imagine how good a sequel could be with today's technology. The potential it had is still there today. A modern one with a bigger, better laid out map, better driving mechanics, the customization could be 10 times improved, not only buying vehicles and boats, but actually customizing them. A far better decoration mode for the mansion as well. Pimp My Mansion was... oh yeah, that needed vastly improving. As for the empire aspect, I could dedicate a whole video as to how that could be nowadays. I know I keep referencing this game for one reason or another, but Mafia 3 could have been a decent substitute, but unfortunately it really wasn't. I've seen a fair few people on the internet state how they hope a game very much like Scarface will pop out of a studio one day, and all I can say is, I do too. The World Is Yours was so good that a remastered version of it would probably go down well. I'd love a sequel, but at this stage I'd be happy with a remaster. It's not that I can't stand a game that's dated in many areas like Scarface, but because playing the game now is an absolute nightmare. You have to get your hands on either a PS2 or Xbox, plus the game on those systems, or you can take a gamble at running the game on a modern PC. And trust me, this game does not like systems far beyond that of which it originally required to work. At this point, I'd take a fixed version on Steam or GOG of the original and call it a day. So for now, hope of there being a sequel or even a World Is Yours remaster is very, very low. It's a pipe dream in all honesty. As far as we can tell, no one actually holds the rights to make a sequel to it or probably even sell the damn thing now. I'll bet the license for some of the music probably ran out as well, so that could be an expensive obstacle if anyone was to take the time to get this out there again. What I will say though is that if anyone has a PS2, Xbox or a decade old PC, And if you haven't played this, go out your way and do so, you won't regret it, especially if you like the sound and look of it from this video. Maybe one day Radical Entertainment will break free from the chains of Activision and actually get to make games of their own again. Maybe they'll set their eyes on Scarface in the future, but of course the people there now might not be the same ones who worked on the game, but that might not matter too much, and even if they were, all that is very unlikely to happen. But from what I've read over the years, the demand is there for it. We just need someone to deliver, as long as it's not Ubisoft. Well, could be worse. Maybe. Right, that is all I have for this video. Now let me know what your thoughts are on this. Are you also a fan of Scarface, looking for its return in the virtual space? What would you like to see in a sequel if there was to be one? Or is this something that just interests you, but you haven't played it? What are you thinking? Let me know in the comments. I'm interested in seeing what the word on this is nowadays. So hit the like button if you like this video. You can also follow me on Twitter or like me on Facebook. Links to those you will find at the bottom of the description. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. That's all from me. So until next time, I'll see you soon.